I'm Eva, 57 years old, and I stood in the rain watching my entire life crumble before my eyes. The tornado had taken everything: the home where I'd spent 35 years, raised my son, and mourned my husband. When I called Thomas, I never expected to hear, "We want privacy. Amanda doesn't want you here." The words cut deeper than the debris that surrounded me. Little did I know that an old phone number I'd kept for decades would change everything. Before I tell you how my life fell apart and then came together in the most unexpected way, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to rebuild your life from scratch. Before the tornado, my life had settled into a comfortable routine. Being a widow for 5 years after losing Robert to cancer, I'd grown accustomed to living alone in our family home in Millfield, Nebraska. It wasn't a fancy place, but it was filled with memories. The kitchen where I taught Thomas to bake cookies, the backyard where we'd hosted countless summer barbecues, and the porch swing where Robert and I would sit and watch the sunset. Our town was small enough that I knew most faces at the grocery store, but large enough that we had a decent school where I'd worked as the librarian for 30 years. I loved my job, introducing generation after generation of children to the magic of books. My colleagues had become like family over the decades, especially after Robert passed. Thomas, my only child, had moved to Lincoln about 6 years ago. At 32, he'd built a successful career as a financial advisor and married Amanda 3 years back. Their wedding was beautiful, but I'd sensed tension with Amanda from the start. Nothing obvious, just subtle signs that she found me old-fashioned, perhaps intrusive. She'd stiffen slightly when I offered cooking tips or mentioned family traditions I hoped they'd continue. Thomas seemed caught between us, trying to keep the peace. Long before Thomas or Amanda, there had been Daniel Jackson, my first real love. We'd been inseparable in high school, the bookish girl and the ambitious boy who dreamed of designing buildings. I still remembered the way he'd sketch buildings on napkins when we shared milkshakes at the local diner. We'd promised each other forever, but then came his scholarship to a prestigious architecture program across the country. The distance proved too much for two 18-year-olds. The break was painful, and I hadn't seen him since he left. Not long after I met Robert and built a different life than the one I'd imagined with Daniel. The day of the tornado had started like any other. There had been storm warnings, but in Nebraska, those weren't unusual. I'd made the decision to shelter in place, heading to my basement when the sirens began to wail. The noise was unlike anything I'd ever heard, a freight train roaring directly overhead. The house shook violently, and I huddled under an old table clutching a photo of Robert and Thomas. When it finally passed and I emerged from the basement, my home was unrecognizable. The roof had been torn away completely, walls collapsed, and rain poured in everywhere. Family photos were scattered across what remained of the living room furniture, destroyed, and possessions I'd collected over a lifetime tossed like confetti across the neighborhood. I stood there in the pouring rain, utterly lost. Emergency vehicles began arriving, and a kind firefighter led me to his truck, draped a blanket over my shoulders, and told me I was lucky to be alive. Lucky didn't feel like the right word as I watched neighbors wander through the wreckage of their homes. That night, I slept on a cot at the high school gymnasium, which the Red Cross had converted into an emergency shelter. Around me were dozens of other displaced Millfield residents, some injured, all in shock. I stared at the ceiling, wondering what I would do next. The following morning, I called Thomas from a phone the Red Cross had provided. My cell phone had been lost in the destruction. "Thomas, honey, I need to ask a huge favor." I began, already noting the hesitancy in his greeting. "The house is gone. Everything's gone. I was wondering if I could stay with you and Amanda until I figure things out." The pause before he answered felt eternal. "Of course, Mom," he finally said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Let me just check with Amanda and call you right back." He did call back 20 minutes later, saying I could come. I borrowed a volunteer's car to make the 3-hour drive to Lincoln, arriving at Thomas and Amanda's modern suburban home by evening. Their house was beautiful, a 2-story with perfect landscaping and a 3-car garage, so different from the cozy, slightly cluttered home I'd raised Thomas in. Dinner that first night was awkward. Amanda made salmon with quinoa, nothing like the comfort food I would have prepared for someone who'd just lost everything. The conversation was strained, focusing mostly on insurance details, rather than my emotional state. "You did have good insurance, right?" Amanda asked, poking at her food. Thomas says a lot of people in small towns underinsure their properties. I believe so, I replied, though truthfully, Robert had handled those matters, and I hadn't reviewed the policy in years. After dinner, as I was settling into their guest room, I overheard them arguing in their bedroom across the hall. It was the right thing to do. Thomas insisted, his voice low but intense. For how long, though? Amanda countered. Your mother has always judged me, Thomas. The way she looks at our house, our food, our lifestyle. I don't want her here critiquing everything I do. What was I supposed to do? She lost everything. There are shelters, insurance money for hotels. I know it sounds harsh, but we have our own lives. I moved away from the door, heart pounding. Had I really made Amanda feel judged? I'd tried so hard to be supportive of their choices, even when they felt foreign to me. The next morning, Thomas cornered me while Amanda was in the shower. Mom, he began, not quite meeting my eyes. We need to talk about arrangements. Arrangements. Look, he sighed. We want privacy. Amanda doesn't want you here. The bluntness of his statement knocked the wind from me. I see, was all I could manage. It's not that we don't care, he added quickly, but we have our routines, our space. Maybe the insurance can cover a rental. I nodded numb. Of course, I understand. I'll pack up and be out before lunch. And I did just that. I held my head high as I placed my few salvaged belongings back in the borrowed car. Thomas tried to apologize without really apologizing, offering to help find me accommodations. I declined. I've managed on my own for 5 years since your father died, I reminded him. I can manage this too. I found a budget motel on the outskirts of Millfield that afternoon. The room was clean but depressing. Beige walls, a sagging mattress, and the persistent smell of old cigarettes despite the no smoking sign. Using the emergency credit card I kept for dire situations, I paid for 2 weeks up front. That first night alone, I finally allowed myself to cry. Not just for my house, but for the son who had turned me away, and for the life I'd taken for granted until it was gone in an instant. The next few weeks brought a cascade of new difficulties. My meeting with the insurance agent revealed what I'd feared. I was significantly underinsured. The policy hadn't been updated in years and would cover barely half the cost of rebuilding. Property values and construction costs have skyrocketed since this policy was written, the agent explained apologetically. And there's a separate issue with content replacement without documented proof of value for your possessions. Each day I would drive to what remained of my home, now just a foundation with scattered debris, searching for anything salvageable. Most everything was ruined by rain and wind, but occasionally I'd find small treasures, a miraculously intact photo album, Robert's old watch, a few pieces of my mother's china. One afternoon, digging through what had been my bedroom closet, I found my high school yearbook swollen with moisture but still intact. Sitting on a chunk of drywall, I paged through it, stopping at Daniel's senior photo. He was handsome, even then, with serious eyes and a confident smile. To Eva, my forever girl, love transcends distance. Always Daniel. His handwritten message made my chest ache with memories of stolen kisses behind the gymnasium and long conversations about the future we'd build together. The insurance company estimated it would take at least a year to rebuild, assuming I could cover the gap between the insurance payout and actual costs. Where would I find that money? My savings had been earmarked for retirement, not disaster recovery. My supervisor at the school library was initially sympathetic, but as weeks passed, her patience with my situation waned. Iva, the commute from your motel is affecting your punctuality, she noted one morning when I arrived 10 minutes late after searching for a clean blouse among my salvaged clothes. And the children need stability right now, especially with so many affected by the tornado. At the grocery store, I spotted Amanda examining avocados. When she saw me, she quickly turned away, pretending not to notice me with my unwashed hair and wrinkled clothes. The rejection stung anew. Later that week, my neighbor Judy, who had been staying with her daughter, called with news. I saw Thomas and Amanda at the travel agency in Lincoln, she said. They're planning a trip to Europe this summer, 3 weeks in Italy and Greece. I thought you should know. The knowledge that my son was planning an expensive vacation while I struggled to find affordable housing felt like a slap. That evening, I received a text from Thomas about storing my salvaged belongings in his garage, purely practical with no inquiry about my well-being. Among the items I'd rescued was Robert's wedding ring. I'd found it in his nightstand drawer, miraculously untouched, while the dresser itself was splintered beyond recognition. Holding it in my palm that night in the motel room, I broke down completely. "I can't do this anymore, Robert," I whispered to the empty room. "I don't know how to rebuild from nothing at 57. For the first time since the tornado, I couldn't sleep at all. The weight of loneliness pressed on my chest until I could barely breathe. My support system wasn't just damaged, it had revealed itself to be far weaker than I'd ever realized." The breaking point came a month after the tornado. The motel manager knocked on my door with an apologetic expression. "Mrs. Mercer, I'm sorry, but we need to increase the rate. With so many displaced people, demand is high, and the owner says we're losing money at current prices." The new rate would be nearly double, far beyond what I could afford on my librarian's salary. I spent that weekend apartment hunting, but everything was either already rented by other tornado victims or completely unaffordable. Thomas called that evening, but only to discuss logistics. "Mom, I cleared some space in our garage for your things. You can drop them off Tuesday after work." "Thomas," I ventured, "the motel is raising rates substantially. I'm having trouble finding a place within my budget." The silence that followed told me everything. "Have you checked with the disaster relief agencies?" he finally suggested. Something snapped inside me. "Thomas, why did you really ask me to leave? Was it truly Amanda's idea?" Another pause. "Look, Mom, it's complicated. Amanda and I value our independence. After taking care of Dad for so long before he died, I've earned my space away from family obligations." The words hit like physical blows. Taking care of his father during cancer had been an obligation, and now I was another burden to be avoided. "I see," I said coldly. "I'll bring my things Tuesday." The stress of everything, homelessness, rejection, financial strain, finally caught up with my body. 2 days later, I collapsed at work and was taken to the hospital. Diagnosis: extreme exhaustion, dehydration, and elevated blood pressure. "You need to reduce your stress levels immediately," the doctor advised, as if that were possible. A well-meaning hospital social worker came to see me, pamphlets in hand. "Mrs. Mercer, there are services available for seniors in housing crisis situations," she began. "I'm 57, I interrupted, mortified. "Oh, I'm sorry, it's just with your situation." She trailed off awkwardly. That evening, scrolling through Facebook from my hospital bed, I saw Amanda had posted photos of their upcoming European vacation. "Countdown to our Mediterranean adventure had blessed had married life," read the caption under pictures of Greek beaches and Italian vineyards. I locked myself in the hospital bathroom and sobbed until a nurse knocked with concern. Back in bed, I reached for my purse and the few personal items I carried everywhere now. Among them was my small address book, salvaged from the tornado debris. My fingers found Daniel's entry automatically, though I hadn't called the number in over 30 years. Would it even still work? Did he still live in California, where he'd gone to college? Was he married? Happy? It was nearly midnight when I finally gathered the courage to dial, tears streaming down my face as the phone rang. He answered on the second ring. "Hello." The voice was deeper than I remembered, but unmistakably Daniel's. "Daniel, it's Eva. Eva Collins." I'd used my maiden name without thinking. There was a moment of silence then. "Iva. My God, is it really you?" "Yes." I managed, my voice breaking. "I'm sorry to call so late and after all these years." "Iva?" he said again, wonder in his voice. "Are you okay? You sound upset." The genuine concern in his tone opened the floodgates, and I found myself telling him everything. The tornado, Thomas's rejection, the hospital, all of it. He listened without interrupting. "Where are you now?" he asked when I finally fell silent. "Millfield General Hospital. They're discharging me tomorrow, but I don't know where I'll go." "I'm in Omaha," he said, surprising me. "I moved back to Nebraska 2 years ago after Sarah died." "Sarah?" "My wife. Cancer. We had 20 good years together before she got sick." "I'm so sorry," I said, meaning it. "Robert, my husband passed from cancer too, 5 years ago." A pause. Then, "Iva, I'm coming to see you. I can be there by noon tomorrow." No, Daniel, you don't have to do that. It's been 30 years and I shouldn't have dumped all this on you. I want to help, he said firmly. And if I'm being honest, I've thought about you more than I should have over the years. I protested again, pride battling desperation, but he was resolute. Before ending the call, he said something that kept me awake the rest of the night. Some connections don't break, Eva. They just pause. True to his word, Daniel arrived at the hospital the next day. I was sitting in the cafeteria having been discharged, but lingering, unsure where to go next. I recognized him immediately despite the gray hair and lines around his eyes. He was still handsome, in a distinguished way, and his smile when he spotted me made my heart race like I was 17 again. Our reunion was awkward at first, a hesitant hug, careful small talk, but soon felt surprisingly natural. Daniel told me about his life, a successful career as an architect, specializing in disaster recovery and restoration, a daughter named Julia, now 34 and working as a nurse, and his return to Nebraska after his wife's passing. I have a property outside Omaha, he explained over coffee. The main house and a separate guest house. The guest house is just sitting empty. Iva, I want you to stay there while you figure things out. Daniel, I couldn't possibly. Why not? It's empty. You need a place. I'd feel better knowing you're safe. He leaned forward. No strings, no expectations, just old friends helping each other. We talked for hours, the years melting away. Daniel confessed that he'd looked me up a few times over the decades, especially after his wife died. I never reached out because I assumed you were happily married. I didn't want to complicate your life. Robert and I had a good marriage, I said honestly, but there were times I wondered about you, too. By evening, exhausted from emotion but feeling more hopeful than I had in weeks, I agreed to Daniel's offer. We drove separately to his property, a beautiful renovated farmhouse set on several acres outside Omaha. The guest house was charming. One bedroom, a small kitchen, and a living area with large windows overlooking a garden. It's perfect. I breathed, overwhelmed by his generosity. That night, Daniel invited me to dinner in the main house. As we sat on his deck afterward watching the sunset with glasses of wine, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before the tornado piece. Adjusting to life at Daniel's property happened naturally. The guest house gave me independence while his companionship provided comfort. I'd expected to feel strange living so close to a man who wasn't Robert, but instead found myself gradually healing in ways I hadn't thought possible. A week after I moved in, Daniel's daughter Julia visited. I'd been nervous about meeting her, fearing she might resent my presence in her father's life, but she greeted me with a warm hug. Dad hasn't stopped talking about you, she confided when Daniel stepped away to grill burgers. It's nice to see him excited about something again. Daniel proved invaluable in navigating the insurance nightmare. His experience with disaster recovery projects gave him insight into the system that I lacked. They're lowballing you, he said, reviewing my paperwork. We can appeal this assessment, and there are disaster relief grants you qualify for that could help cover the gap. My new living situation inevitably reached Thomas. He called one evening, his voice tight. Mom, Judy mentioned you're living with some man from high school. Don't you think that's a bit sudden? I'm living in a guest house on Daniel's property, I corrected. And frankly, Thomas, you lost the right to judge when you turned me away. The silence that followed was satisfying in a way I'm not proud of. I was trying to establish boundaries, he finally said defensively. And I'm trying to survive, I countered. Daniel has been kind enough to offer shelter when my own son wouldn't. As weeks passed, Daniel and I fell into comfortable routines. Morning coffee on his deck, occasional shared meals, and long conversations about books, architecture, and our separate journeys through life. He respected my independence, never pressuring me for more than I was ready to give. At a community meeting about tornado recovery, Daniel spoke eloquently about resilient rebuilding practices. I watched him with pride as he outlined plans to help our town recover stronger than before. Afterward, several of my neighbors commented on my gentleman friend. He seems wonderful, Iva, my colleague from the library whispered, and the way he looks at you. One evening, Daniel presented me with architectural drawings, plans for rebuilding my home reimagined with modern safety features but keeping the character I'd loved. I took the liberty, he said hesitantly. If you hate them, just Say so. I studied the plans, throat tight with emotion. He'd preserved the aspects of my home I'd cherished, the big front porch, the kitchen layout Robert and I had designed together, while improving everything else. They're perfect, I managed, tears threatening. That night, looking through old photographs I'd salvaged, Daniel found one of us at our senior prom. We laughed at our youthful appearance, and somehow the laughter led to our first kiss since 1982. It felt both familiar and entirely new. Later, alone in the guest house, guilt crept in. Was I betraying Robert's memory? That night, I dreamed of my late husband. In the dream, he was healthy again, sitting on our porch swing. "Be happy, Eva," Dream Robert said simply. "That's all I ever wanted for you." I woke with tear-stained cheeks but a lighter heart. As summer progressed, I found new purpose beyond my own recovery. Daniel introduced me to his contacts in disaster relief, and I began coordinating library resources for displaced families. The work was fulfilling, allowing me to use my skills while helping others in situations similar to mine. My confidence grew along with my feelings for Daniel. I was learning that accepting help didn't diminish my independence, it enhanced it. 6 months after the tornado, I stood on the concrete foundation of what would soon be my rebuilt home. Construction crews had just begun framing the structure, and for the first time, recovery felt real rather than theoretical. "It's really happening," I said to Daniel, who stood beside me, his arm around my waist. "Just another 6 months," he agreed. "Though I've grown rather fond of having you as my neighbor." I turned to reply, but noticed a familiar car pulling up to the construction site. Thomas stepped out, looking uncertain. "Mom," he called, approaching slowly. "I heard construction was starting today." Daniel squeezed my hand before tactfully excusing himself to speak with the foreman, giving Thomas and me privacy. "It looks like it's going to be nice," Thomas offered, gesturing to the framing. "Daniel designed it," I said. "He preserved what mattered while making it better." Thomas nodded, shuffling his feet. "Mom, I owe you an apology, a big one." We sat on the tailgate of Daniel's truck, and my son finally opened up about his resentments, fears, and regrets. He admitted that Amanda hadn't actually demanded I leave. It had been his decision born from complicated feelings about his father's illness and his own desire for independence. "I was selfish," he concluded, "and seeing you rebuild your life, seeing your strength, it made me realize what I'd done." Our reconciliation wasn't instantaneous or complete, but it was a beginning. I set clear boundaries about what I needed from our relationship going forward, and Thomas seemed to truly listen. Amanda remained distant, but I found I could accept that now. Not everyone in our lives is meant to be close, and that's okay. My relationship with Thomas would continue evolving, finding its new shape in the aftermath of both tragedy and growth. As fall turned to winter, Daniel and I grew closer. One evening over dinner in his home, he made an unexpected suggestion. "What if you didn't move back to your house when it's finished?" he asked cautiously. "What do you mean? What if we designed our future together instead? You could sell the new house, invest the money. We could travel or renovate this place together, or even find somewhere new if you wanted." "Are you asking me to move in with you?" I clarified, heart racing. "I'm asking for more than that," he said, taking my hand. "I'm asking if you'd consider making a life with me. No rush, no pressure, but Eva, losing you once was enough for one lifetime." The decision wasn't immediate, but it didn't take long either. By Christmas, we'd decided to merge our lives, planning a small spring wedding in the rebuilt school library, where I'd worked for decades. On the 1-year anniversary of the tornado, our community held a memorial and celebration of recovery. Many homes, including mine, were nearly completed. Businesses had reopened, and while scars remained, healing was evident everywhere. I was asked to speak at the event, and standing before my friends and neighbors, I reflected on the journey. "A year ago, I lost everything I thought defined me," I told them. "My home, my possessions, my sense of security. What I discovered in the aftermath was that I'm defined not by what I have, but by how I respond to life's challenges. And I discovered that sometimes losing everything opens the door to finding things you never thought you'd have again." My gaze found Daniel in the crowd, his proud smile warming me more than my coat in the brisk spring air. The guilt about moving forward after Robert had faded with time and self-compassion. I kept his memory close while embracing my unexpected second chance at love. The wedding ring I'd salvaged now hung on a chain around my neck, not as an anchor to the past, but as an honored chapter in my continuing story. Sometimes, I concluded to the gathered community, you have to lose the roof over your head to see the sky clearly again. My rebuilt house sold quickly, and Daniel and I used part of the proceeds to establish a disaster preparedness fund for our community. Thomas and I continued rebuilding our relationship, finding a new adult foundation based on mutual respect rather than obligation. Life would never be what it was before the tornado. It had become something different. In many ways, something more. Not despite the loss, but because of how we chose to respond to it. The storm had taken my home, but led me to a new definition of what home really means. Have you ever experienced a loss that eventually led to unexpected blessings? Let me know in the comments below. And if my story touched your heart, please subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that. Even the worst storms eventually pass, often revealing blue skies you never expected to see again. Thank you for listening, and remember that it's never too late for a new beginning.